Hello and welcome to The Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. On this show, we take a look at what it means to age in America and in other places around the world with positive and empowering conversations that challenge, inspire, and encourage all to age with abundance. Today, we're pleased to welcome Rick Moody. Rick is a retired executive and most recently Vice President of Academic Affairs with AARP. But he has a long history of education, advocacy, and good works in the aging space, including his role as Executive Director of the Brookdale Center on Aging at Hunter College and Chairman of the Board of Elder Hostel. Currently, Rick is behind the Human Values and Aging newsletter with over 10,000 subscribers and supports many nonprofits with both fundraising and marketing help. He's also the author of over 100 scholarly articles as well as a number of books. But of course, that's not all. He's got new things up his sleeve, and we're going to unpack that and more on the show today. Welcome, Rick.
Glad to be here.
Just a reminder that this podcast series is sponsored by United Church Homes, Ruth Frost Parker Center for Abundant Aging. To learn more about the center, including our annual symposium in October, you can visit www.unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center. So, first of all, it's hard to take your entire professional life, Rick, and condense it down into a few short sentences. But at the heart, I think, of everything you have done is helping to address ageism. And why have you spent much of your life and your current life now in retirement in this area?
Oh, there's a really very simple answer to that question. I used to work for the man who invented the word ageism. His name was Robert Butler. But at the time that I worked for him, this is going back more than 20 years, I didn't think of myself as one of those people because I'm 79 years old now. So do the math. I was 59 then. Those people are people who are old. So my job is to help protect them, help them get rid of ageism. And then it's a little bit like a scholar of Japanese who teaches Japanese his whole life. And then one day he actually visits Japan. Well, that's me. I visited Japan. Well, not Japan. I actually have visited Japan too, by the way. That's another story. I visited old age. Not only have I visited, but I'm here. Just in the last week, Beth, since you and I talked, I had my 79th birthday. That's another way of saying your 80th year. I never imagined myself like that. I'm like most people. I don't think of myself as old. That's the problem. If we don't think of ourselves as whatever it is, then we don't want to go there. And actually, there is a good way to think of it, and that's what you call abundant aging, abundance of life. It's all good.
Thanks, Rick, and happy birthday. I was remembering as you were talking that you had a birthday since we last talked.
Yeah.
How have you experienced or seen ageism in your own life then?
Actually, I've seen very little ageism as a target for me. I talk to lots of people who experience this, but I haven't experienced it. Instead, I've been in very good health. And so as a result, I consider myself, I'm one of the exceptions. Maybe I'm not growing old at all. That's a bit of an illusion. So that if we're not speaking about ageism, that is prejudice or a decremental negative idea about old people, we might ask ourselves this. Maybe we ourselves, I'm speaking about Rick Moody right now, think of ourselves once again as not one of them until something challenging happens. Just this morning, I got a message from one of my old friends, Peter Whitehouse, MD, a very distinguished neurologist and specialist in Alzheimer's disease. Even as we're having this Zoom call right now, he's undergoing heart surgery, which he didn't expect. And that's really a description about how people encounter age. Age doesn't happen. It happens to somebody else until something happens to them. Maybe they get retired and people stop returning their phone calls. Maybe they experience some mild health impairment. Just before this call started, I put on my hearing aids. I didn't think I needed hearing aids. But my wife says, no, Rick, you're always talking loud, very loud. And I realized there's a reason for that. I didn't put my hearing aids on. That's why the men need the women, not for hearing
And
aids.
as a matter of fact, Rick, I had the exact same experience about 18 months ago at the age of 59. And I went in to get just a baseline check, and the
Yep.
audiologist said, "Beth, you're below the baseline." And it took me 6 weeks before I'm like, "Okay, let me try them.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's
I,
exactly right.
that's kind of the internalized ageism. I'm not old enough to have
Yes,
hearing loss, in spite of the fact that my mother has had hearing loss for a very long time.
that's a
So
good
yeah."
example. It's a wonderful example. And so when the audiologist says, here's your problem, blah, 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 and my response is, could you speak up? I didn't quite hear you. That actually happened too, by the way.
And I don't know what your experience is, but actually my relationship with my spouse David improved significantly once I got the hearing aids in, because we weren't
It's
constantly arguing because
That's right.
I wasn't speaking loud enough or he wasn't speaking loud enough. So
That's,
yeah, yeah,
I mean, what you've just described, what we've just described here is a great way of talking about ageism and population aging and abundance of life. It's actually quite parallel to climate change, which is an area that I work on these days, which is it's already happening just as climate changes, but maybe we don't recognize it. We don't acknowledge it. And one reason why we don't is because either we think we can't stop it. That's not true for climate change. We can modify it. But maybe we think we can't adapt to it, but we can adapt to aging. And what we've just talked about, simple case of hearing loss, is adaptation. And you can't adapt unless you recognize that it's happening. So, one definition of successful aging, the definition I like to use, is just 3 words: decrement with compensation. That's it, just 3 words. So, you have
yeah.
some decrement. Maybe you can't walk so easily anymore. You need a different kind of shoe. You need hearing aids. Maybe you have to start taking some blood pressure pills, as I do. I'm not here to talk about Rick Moody's medical condition, but I think that people have different challenges, and the question that you have to ask yourself is, what can I do to adapt to it so that I can still have the abundant life that I want to have? That's really the challenge.
Exactly, exactly. So I want to come back to the fact that in my introduction, I referred to you as retired. And I think
Yeah.
actually when we talked earlier, you said you proudly retired. So you don't shy away from that term. And I
No, I
and I
don't.
talk to a lot of people who do, and they use lots of different words: retirement,
Right.
renewment. Why is it that you don't shy away from
The,
this term?
the only people who shy away from the word retirement are people who are the healthy, wealthy, and wise. That is, the
Mm,
people who are in good shape in some way or other, and they want to continue to be that. Uh, Good example is Joe Biden. He wants to continue being president of the United States. I don't want to talk about the politics of it, but what I do want to say is that Mr. Biden is a couple of years older than me. He has some issues. Everybody knows that. He knows it. The question is, can you adapt to it? Can you use your strengths? And if you can, then adaptation is a very, very good thing. And we need to be looking for those opportunities to adapt, and when we find them, we may find that we have life abundantly. That's just an example. And it's, I try. And so you ask, why do I refer to retirement? Because I enjoy it. I have enough money. I have good health. But most of all, I have freedom. When I worked for AARP, I was a senior executive in a very large organization, very complex organization, right in the middle of all the politics of everything in Washington, D.C., which is where I lived. Well, that has a lot of good things to it, but it also has some bad things. You have to be very careful about what you say. You can't say anything you want to say, and things that you say might be used against you or against your employer. In my case, AARP. I made some mistakes like that. I won't even rehearse what they were, but everybody can make those mistakes in any career that you have, including the career of being a parent, by the way. I'm the parent now of 2 adult children, aged 35 and 39, my son and my daughter. That's why I live here in San Mateo, to be near our grandchildren. So I'm kind of a professional grandfather at this point. And that's a good thing. People look forward to something like that for the most part. And I think that if we can begin to identify things in retirement that are positive, that are enjoyable, then people will say, gee, I can't wait for that. And by the way, that's already true for people. If you're working in a sweater factory or a canner or something like that, you may be doing the same thing day after day, and you may be looking forward to a time when you can retire. In fact, that's true for people who have occupations which are difficult, which are burdensome in one way or another. The people who are at the top of the food chain, if I could put it that way, and I was one of those people, um, they often say, well, gee, I want to continue doing this. And I could have continued doing that at AARP, just as people can often continue in their jobs, which is a good thing. We want to give more opportunity like that. But at the same time, we want to recognize that for many people, jobs are not the beginning and end of life. They want something better. They want something different. And that's what retirement can mean.
So you've talked a couple times here in looking back at your own life. How is that? Is that a part of what life review is? I know Butler had talked about that.
I think
Um,
so.
and how has your own review of your own life enabled you or empowered you to be able to do what you're doing today?
I'm not sure how it's empowered me because, in many ways, I'm doing the same things that I was doing 20 or 30 years ago. Um, you mentioned my newsletter, Human Values in Aging. Uh, that goes out to the thousands of people, but I was doing it years ago too. So many things we can do playing tennis, not that I'm good at tennis, but golf, anything like that. People can continue to do those things. Maybe some things they can't do so easily, so readily. That's okay. You do the things you can do. Decrement with compensation. And one form of compensation is doing the things that you know how to do. By the way, I'll give you one good example. Great pianists, when they get to be very old, sometimes they can't play quite so fast. So they deliberately, Rubinstein was like this, deliberately slow down some things so that they can do fast something else. In other words, they have a kind of decrement with compensation. People do this with typing too, with if they can't type so fast. Older typists, by the way, cannot type as fast as younger ones, but they often type better because they're more careful. They're looking ahead. They're looking at before what's going to come. And that's the kind of skill, if in a strong sense, we could even call it wisdom, being able to recognize what's come before. And that really is what life review is all about. Life review is not a sentimental journey or thinking about all the good things I did or thinking about all the bad things I did. That can lead to regret, too, by the way. No, it's looking at your life in a different way. What did it mean? Why did I do that? Who was I? What kind of person was I? I've spent many years giving talks on Rembrandt's self portraits. He did his self portrait more often than any artist in history. 10% of his output consists of self portraits. People don't always know that. And as he got older, his self portraits became different, but they were still Rembrandt. He didn't have to prove himself. He was retired, so to speak, retired from having to prove himself, but not retired from painting. And the great art critic Coomaraswamy once said, it's not that the artist is a special kind of person, it's that each person is a special kind of artist. That's a great idea to take in. And we think of our lives that way. We realize that just like Rembrandt or Georgia O'Keeffe, there are many great artists like this, we begin to think of ourselves still having capacity, but maybe doing it in a different way. That to me is what life review can mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Twyla Tharp, the dancer
Yes.
choreographer, in her book "Keep on Moving," one of my favorite quotes is "So you used to be able to know how to do 6 pirouettes to the left. Doesn't matter. The question now is, what do you do
that's
after you do six
that's
pirouettes to the
right.
left?"
That's right. This is a beautiful statement. This is a beautiful statement because her book is titled Just Keep Moving.
So, yep, yep,
And that's
yep.
great advice to people of all ages, but particularly as we grow older. And I try to do that too.
So, so Rick, what are some of the things that keep us from aging positively or
You said
positive
it.
longevity?
You said it at the beginning. Ageism. Ageism is that little voice in my head that says, "You're too old for that. You really can't do this." And everybody has that little voice in their head because we've gotten that voice into us from the time we were very young. And I had that too when I retired. But I listened to the voice and I said, no, it doesn't have to be that way. So I did whitewater rafting. I did ballroom dancing. I took a week-long program in mime just in order to, you know, movement, just keep moving. Each step along the way, I try to look for things that I'm not good at. I took a week-long program in contemplative photography. I was the worst photographer in that group of 12 people. Absolutely the worst. It didn't matter. I'm retired. I don't care what they think. I'm here to learn photography, contemplative photography. That's the way that we get beyond it, by not listening to the voice in our head. Those voices, and by the way, this doesn't just apply to ageism or negative views of aging, it applies to all sorts of things. Women have their own challenge, right? People have their challenge if they are not good at music or art. Oh, you'll never be good at music. You'll never be good at art. I've just taken up voice lessons recently for the first time in my life, even though I've been singing since I was a college student, high school student, but I didn't take the lessons. I realized my voice needs help. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. So that's why we have to always be overcoming what my son, he taught me this, my 35-year-old son, he taught me the phrase self-limiting beliefs. Self-limiting beliefs. As soon as he said that, I said, wow, you're onto something. Self-limiting beliefs. And that's another reason why, by the way, why elders like me, I'm 79 years old now, just this past week, why we have to be in contact with young people. Very, very important, because we can learn from them and they can learn from us.
Yeah, absolutely. My mother-in-law raised 6 kids and used to say she didn't have a creative bone in her body.
Right.
And after the
Self-limiting
well,
beliefs.
self-limiting, and I'm like, raising 6 kids is really creative. She
Yeah.
after the kids were all gone, and she was well into her 70s. She took a China painting course,
There you go.
and by the time she passed away at the age of 80, she had painted some piece of china for all 6 kids, all 14 grandchildren, one of whom hadn't even been born yet. Yeah, and so that message, "I'm not creative," was a self-limiting belief until
It
she
is.
decided, "Well, I'm gonna try something new." So,
It
yeah,
is. It is.
absolutely.
And that's why I had the great privilege to work for Robert Butler, who himself overcame so many self-limiting beliefs. He created the field of geriatric medicine. And one of the great privileges of my life, we think about life review, was my work with Elder Hostel. It's now called
Mhm.
Rhodes Scholar, by the way, because a lot
Right.
of people didn't like that word elder. They said, well, what does that mean? Elders, I'm not going to be one of them. Once again, that's self-limiting belief. But the people who go to the Elder Hostel program, Rhodes Scholar program, as we call it now, they experience the world with creativity, with curiosity. They go to new places. I've gone on many of those programs myself, I'll admit. And I ran programs like that. And I loved meeting with the old people. And I enjoyed it very much. And they enjoyed it too.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Rick, you had mentioned along the way that one of your first books that you wrote, you were talking about abundance
Yep.
and in relation to aging, and because that's a big deal for us at United Church Homes, and now that this is what 40 years later, and
Yep.
you are in elderhood. What about that book would you rewrite today, and what about your concepts of abundance when you were 40 ring true to today?
What what I would I'm not sure that I would rewrite very much of it at all, to tell you the truth, and not because I say the same thing over and over again. I don't. I'm constantly saying different things, doing different things. But that title of that book comes from something in the Gospels, in the New Testament,
Mhm.
when Jesus says, I came that they might have life and have it abundantly. Well, how does one have life abundantly? Not necessarily by escaping death, but by facing reality and living from the life within us, which is always there. And that's what Jesus was calling people to do. Now, not everybody listened, not everybody wanted to hear, but some did. And that's the important point. Some will hear, and some in us can overcome those self limiting beliefs. So we have to become born again, if you want to put it in those terms, every day. And don't think of it as an event that happens to a person at one point in life and, gee, I'm a born again Christian or something. That's great. But that's not what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about something that even his own disciples didn't understand. Lots of people don't understand this, but it's true.
Yeah, it strikes me that, you're talking about the polarity between self-limiting beliefs and abundance. That
Yes,
those
that's
are
right.
really opposites, and
They are.
it's an understanding of abundance that helps us to overcome the limitations that we
It is.
believe. Yeah.
It is.
So I want to come to one of your current projects, one of two current books I believe that you're working on,
Yep.
and speaking of abundance, and that has to do with dreams and the second half
Yes.
of life. What has brought you to this topic, and where has your passion for this? Where is that leading you?
I don't have to come to dreams. Dreams come to me in the middle of the night. And every person dreams, not just every human being, but animals dream too. Mammals, at least, probably not reptiles, but birds do. So any warm-blooded creatures dreaming, we don't know what dreaming means. We don't know why dreaming is there, but we know it must have some purpose, have some function, because it occupies our time, our life, every night when we go to sleep. So this is one of those great mysteries. But if we pay attention to it, dreams may send us messages if only we can listen, we can pay attention. I like to say dreams show us what we already know but cannot yet see. And that's the sense in which dreams can be very meaningful. I'll give you one example. Do you know the name Ashton Applewhite?
Oh
I think you
yes,
might.
yes.
Was she on the show? Perhaps she was.
Not
Uh,
yet, not yet.
well, before I ever met Ashton Applewhite, I was hosting a positive aging conference, which I did 9 of them for AARP. And she was going to be the speaker, the keynote speaker. And the night before I met her for the first time, I had a dream in which I was 70 years old at the time, so we're going back 9 years. I was trying to get into medical school, and the dean said, "No, you're too old. We can't accept you. That's just not possible, Rick." Um, and I was very angry. I kept beating on the table again and again. I need to be in medical school. I need to get in here. And it was only when I met Ashton in real life, she did a terrific job of giving her speech, that I realized what that dream meant. It meant that ageism was in me, and the fear that I would be rejected by, in that case, going to medical school. As it happens, when I was a college student, this is a while ago, between 1963 and 1967, I started out being pre-med. That was my intention. I wanted to. Organic chemistry kind of changed my mind about that, but
It does that for a lot of people.
it does that for a lot of people. But it was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because not because I'm against medicine. I have a lot of doctor friends. I've worked with medical people. I have great respect for medicine and for all the health professions. But I needed to get beyond that illusion that I had. And my dream, in a way, was telling me the same thing. You need to get beyond the illusion that you need to do something new and different, like go to medical school when you're 70 years old. No, you don't need to do that. And you don't need to be angry about it either. You need to find a different way of being. I went and got a different doctorate, in my case, doctor of philosophy. I was still interested in medical things. I did write the first book. You didn't mention this, but that's okay. It was 1992, the first book on biomedical ethics and aging, Johns
Hmm.
Hopkins University Press. I'm not saying this to sell my book. It's more than 30 years out of date at this point. But my point is that the things that we did in the past, they're still with us. The past isn't over. Faulkner said this. Faulkner, the great novelist from Mississippi, he said, the past isn't over. It's not even past. And that's true for our dream life. And our dream life shows us part of ourself which is outside time. So you asked, what why am I interested in dreams? Because it can give us important messages, sometimes very deep messages, sometimes messages we don't understand. That's okay. And again, I keep quoting the Bible, but this is, after all, the Church of Christ is putting this on. Uh,
United Church of Christ.
United
United Church
Church
of
of Christ.
Christ.
United
Very
Church of
different.
Christ. There's a passage there where Martha and Mary, remember the two encounter each other, and Martha is busy making the food and everything, and Mary is just sitting there. Okay, and she becomes upset. Martha does with Mary, and finally Jesus says, Mary has chosen the better part. Mary has chosen the better part. What does that mean? That means that something in Mary pondered these things in her heart. Pondered. What does it mean to ponder in your heart? It means to set aside time, to be alone, to be silent, to be inner. And that's also an important part of aging. It's an important part of dreaming. It's an important part of life. You don't have to wait to become old to take up what is called in the Christian tradition contemplative prayer. Contemplative prayer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, Rick, are you more aware of your dreams at this stage in life than you were previously when maybe you were working professionally and busy and deadlines and all those kinds of
Yeah,
things?
I can't be sure of it. I can't be sure of it. And the reason I say that is because I keep track of my dreams. I write down in a notebook every day when I do remember my dreams. So I try to remember my dreams. Not everybody is in that category. Not everybody is a dream worker like I am. That's okay. When people say to me things like, well, I don't dream, or sometimes they say, I don't remember my dreams. Is that a bad thing? My response is always the same. Dreams do their work and you do your work. Your pancreas is doing its work all the time, when you're sleeping, when you're waking. And the same is true of something in us which is dreaming, which is there. It's kind of like the stars are there. Even right now, I'm looking out the window and the sky is blue here in San Mateo, where I live. So I can't see the scar. I can't see the stars. I see the clouds. Well, that great song, I've looked at life from both sides
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Okay. When she says that, and several different vocalists sing it, but um, the answer is I see something different now. And that's the meaning of life review. The stars are there all the time. You just don't see them during the daylight. The dreams are there all the time. You just don't remember them. You can try, and it can be helpful. But don't feel bad if you don't remember your dreams. They're there, they're doing their work.
Yeah, I usually remember mine during the day and something will happen and it's like, "Oh, I had a dream about that last night."
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. It's called deja vu.
Deja vu. There we
I've
go.
I've already seen it. That's the French language, and I've recently started taking up French again. I subscribe to Le Monde, so does my wife, to improve our cognition and
Yep.
to improve our mastery of the language. It's a beautiful language, but again, the voice in you that says, "Oh, I'm too old to learn this," or "I'm too old to take voice lessons or mime lessons or whatever." No, don't listen to that voice. Don't feel that you have to do it just because somebody else is doing it. But do the thing that is close to your heart. Ponder it in your heart.
I think it's Marjorie Zoe Bakeston who talks in her book about creative aging about
Yes,
both
she
the
does.
need for beginner's mind and mastery. So we
Yes.
need to continue to master those things that that we've been doing for a long time in new ways, and then beginning mine, learning new things.
I'm glad
Balance.
you mentioned that, because Mary Catherine Bateson, which was her full name,
Yeah.
was actually the keynote speaker at one of our positive aging conferences. And I had the great good fortune to get to meet her, to have dinner with her, and to hear from her about her life and her own story. She's now no longer with us, deceased, but the message that she left in her book, uh, very much with us. And that's also a message about aging, that our time is not limited. If you're 79 years old like me, more of your life is in the past than in the future. We have to face that. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to work with it to think about what our legacy could be. Very
Yeah,
important.
I had the opportunity of hearing Mary Catherine Beatson as well at the International Conference on Aging and Spirituality, and it was life changing. And I was looking. I usually keep Composing Your Further Life right here by my computer, and I refer to it often. And I love the fact that she was advocating for what we call this time of life and later life to be called the stage of active wisdom.
Yes,
Um,
a great phrase, active
yeah.
wisdom. And you know, that metaphor of composing, my favorite composer, very simple, is Johann Sebastian Bach.
Mhm.
People don't, and the B minor Mass, which is his great masterpiece, people don't know that Bach never heard the B minor Mass performed. He was a Lutheran. He was not a Catholic to begin with.
Yeah.
There is no such
Yeah.
thing as the Mass in the Lutheran Church, but he wrote it anyway. And what did he use in it? He used pieces in it that he'd previously written, that were previously parts of cantatas or other performances, and he recycled them. So that's in itself, in his old age, this was like, along with the Goldberg variations, you're beginning to get the idea that I'm into music, which is true. But there's a metaphor there. There's an allegory there that Bach in his life, maybe he was the greatest of all composers, right up there with Mozart, put it that way. He was reusing things previously. That's a kind of life review, if you think of it that way. And but he's using them in a different way. They aren't the same. And even the B minor Mass, the last part of the B minor Mass ends with the phrase, Dona nobis pacem, give us peace. I can almost not say that without crying because it's so profound. But that peace in the Dona nobis pacem, it reuses a melody that happened earlier in the B minor Mass. Once again, always recycling.
Yeah, another musical idea around that is variations on a theme.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
our lives are variations on these themes of
Yes.
things which are most important to us, which give us
Yes.
meaning and purpose in our life.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
And when people say, gee, I'm old, I no longer have a purpose, I don't have a meaning, the meaning is all around us. We have to open our eyes and look for it. And that, by the way, is true for my other book that I'm working on, which is on climate change and aging.
yeah.
Because so many people are in despair and they're hopeless. The great environmentalist David Orr once said, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And that's a great description. Great description. That's not me. That's David Orr.
You know, Rick, I think we're going to have to come back for another podcast because I really want to talk to you more specifically about that book and the topic
Okay,
of
we'll do it.
ageism and climate
I'm
change.
I'm here all the time. I'm retired, remember?
So, as we bring this conversation and anticipate future conversations to close, reminder that I'm going to ask you 3 questions that
Sure.
we've queued you up to. But first, before we do that, how can people find you?
They can find me very simply on digital means. H.R. Moody, that's one word, H. Harry R. Moody, my full name, but people call me Rick. H.R. Moody at yahoo.com. And anybody can write me a message and I will reply. I reply to people every day, lots and lots of people. And I'll be happy to send a sample of my newsletter, Human Values in Aging.
And I was going to say, how can they subscribe to your newsletter?
That's the answer. It's for
Okay.
free. I tell people my advice is free and it's worth every penny it costs. So the newsletter is free, and I'm not selling anything. I don't even mention myself and my own books. I never mention any of that. I mention other people's work. That's what I do. I'm really a helper to help other
Yeah.
people. That's the answer to your question. They can send me a message and they'll get a copy. And I only send that newsletter to people who specifically say, I want to subscribe to it. Otherwise, I don't send it to anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'll just testify that I am a happy newsletter subscriber, and
Okay.
and um, I look forward to that
Yeah.
when it comes.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we are to the last three questions. First
Yeah.
one: when you think about how you've aged, what do you think has changed about you or grown with you that you really like about yourself?
What I really like about myself is connecting with people. And now I know Beth Long-Higgins, and we're connected. Um, I think it was the great philosopher Martin Buber who said, all real living is meeting. And that's what he was talking about, not meetings and faculty meetings and things like that, but connecting with people so that it's possible to do that even in old age. It is absolutely. So that's the thing I like about. I used to think I was, Moody, going to be a scholar. You know, if I'm not a doctor, then I'll be a scholar. No, I'm a connector, and
Yes, you are.
that's what I appreciate about myself and what I appreciate about others.
Great. Okay, next question. What has surprised you the most about you as you have aged?
What has surprised me the most is how I keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Even though I keep note of them in my notebooks and I make a strong intention to correct myself, but I still keep making. For example, I talk much too loud. I was in a restaurant with my wife recently, my wife of 55 years, who said, "Excuse me, Rick, would you speak up? There's still a few people in this restaurant who can't hear you." And that's a true story, by the way. And what she's pointing to is that, yes, I talk too loud. So I try to overcome that, but it's not easy. So that surprised me that, despite my trying to overcome my bad habits, they're still with me. They don't go away. That's my
Yeah,
surprise.
great, great. And lastly, is there someone that you've met or who has been in your life that has set an example for you in aging, someone that inspires you to age abundantly?
Yes. Jan Hively is the example. And she is a person who's in her early 90s now. She lives now, I think, in Seattle or Portland. I've forgotten which. Your memory is not quite as good when you're 79 as it was when you were 69. But Jan Hively is the one who inspires me. I even have a portrait of her as the conclusion to my book on aging and climate change.
Hmm.
But along with her, I would also mention Houston Smith, who's more well known to people, who wrote a very famous book, The Religions of Man, about comparative religion. And I had occasion to spend actually a fair amount of time with Houston Smith, and I've learned a lot from him. And he was a person who found deep meaning in all the religions of the world. And he eventually even practiced most of those religions in his own life. And he was a person, by the time he got to be in his 90s, he got to be a point where he was beginning to get a little frail. You know what he did? He lived in Berkeley, California, where he retired to. He didn't live there originally. He checked himself into a nursing home deliberately in order to live there so that he wouldn't be a burden on his wife of many years. And what did he do once inside the nursing home? He started helping other people in the nursing home. So Houston Smith, to me, was an example, not just of a scholar, but of one would say in Yiddish, a mensch, a real human being. And so is Jan Hively. Those are two people who I would put up there.
Well, it's really interesting, Rick, because one of my aging heroes is Ruth Pfeiffer, and she also was in her mid 90s, had been living in assisted living,
Yep.
had a health incident, was in the hospital, and she told her kids, "Clean out my apartment, move me into the nursing home." And they were like, "You're only going to be there for rehab, Mom. It's not." And the doctor's like, "You don't have to be there." She's
Yeah.
like, "Nope, I'm making the decision, so you don't have to make it." She moved into the nursing home, and she was one of the best volunteers for the next 2
There you
years.
go.
She
There you
was
go.
she was one of the healthiest
That's
persons.
right.
And
That's right.
she went and she read to people and checked on them, and yeah, so a similar spirit to your
The Dalai Lama is now in his 80s, and the Dalai Lama
No.
said, be kind whenever possible. It is always possible.
Yeah.
It is always
Nice.
possible. That's the
Nice.
message. That's the message.
Nice. Well, Rick, we could go on for a long time. And like I said, we will come back to another conversation at some point here.
Okay.
So I want to thank you, and I want to thank our listeners for listening to this episode of The Art of Aging, part of the Abundant Aging podcast series from United Church Homes. And we want to hear from you. What's changed about you as you've aged that you love? What has surprised you most? And how do you define abundant aging? Or who is your abundant aging hero or your abundant aging influencer? Join us at www.abundantagingpodcast.com to share your ideas. You can also give us feedback when you visit the Ruth Frost Parker Center website at www.unitedchurchhomes.org/Parker-Center. And if you're attending the 2024 On Aging Conference in San Francisco this year, you can. I will be there, as well as our producer here, Mike, and we'd love
And
to.
I will be there too. And I'm going to be having a positive aging lunch. And if people send me a message, I can get you an invitation.
Okay, I'll send you a message, Rick. I'll see you there. I didn't realize that. Great, great. I'll see you in a couple weeks then.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick, and blessings.
Thank you. Bye-bye.